friends. It's Mrs. Rose. Hope you're all doing well. Let me just remove the mask because I'm here alone at school right now, and I wanted to share this book with you called Enemy Pie. It's just about Thanksgiving time, and many of us have pies on our mind. It's a different kind of pie, though, and it's written by Derek Munson. I hope you'll enjoy reading this with me. I'll come a little closer so you can see the photos. The illustrations are beautiful. It should have been a perfect summer. My dad helped me build a tree house in our backyard. My sister was at camp for 3 whole weeks. And I was on the best baseball team in town. It should have been a perfect summer, but it wasn't. It was all good until Jeremy Ross moved into the neighborhood right next door to my best friend Stanley. I did not like Jeremy Ross. He laughed at me when he struck me out in a baseball game. He had a party on his trampoline and didn't invite me, but he did invite my best friend Stanley. Jeremy Ross was the one and only person on my enemy list. I never even had an enemy list until he moved into the neighborhood. But as soon as he came along, I needed one. I hung it up on my treehouse where Jeremy Ross was not allowed to go. Dad understood stuff like enemies. He told me that when he was my age, he had enemies too, but he knew a way to get rid of them. I asked him to tell me how. Tell you how? I'll show you how, he said. He pulled out a really old recipe book off the kitchen shelf. Inside, there was a worn-out scrap of paper with faded writing. Dad held it up and squinted at it. Enemy pie, he said, satisfied. Enemy pie. You may be wondering, what exactly goes into enemy pie? I was wondering too. But Dad said the recipe was so secret, he couldn't even tell me. I decided it must be magic. I begged him to tell me anything. I will tell you this, he said. Enemy pie is the fastest known way to get rid of enemies. Now, of course, this got my mind working. What kinds of things, disgusting things, must go into a pie for an enemy? I thought Dad might want some weeds from the garden, and he shook his head no. I brought him some earthworms and rocks, but he didn't think he'd need those. I gave him the gum that I'd been chewing on all morning, and he gave it right back to me. I went out to play alone. I shot baskets until the ball got stuck on the roof. I threw a boomerang that never came back to me. And all that while, I listened to the sounds of my dad chopping and stirring and blending the ingredients of enemy pie. This could be a great summer after all, I thought. Enemy pie was going to be awful. I tried to imagine how horrible it must smell, or worse yet, what it must look like. It sounded like it was going to be pretty rotten. As far as I could tell, a smell was coming from the kitchen, but I was a bit confused. I went in to ask Dad what was wrong. Enemy pie shouldn't smell so good. But Dad was smart. If enemy pie smelled bad, your enemy would never eat it, he said. I could tell he'd made enemy pie before. The buzzer rang and Dad put on the oven mitts and pulled the pie out of the oven. It looked just like a plain old pie. It actually looked good enough to eat. I was catching on, but still I really wasn't sure how this enemy pie thing worked. What exactly did it do to enemies? Maybe it made their hair fall out, or their breath stinky, or maybe it made bullies cry. I asked Dad, but he was no help. He wouldn't tell me a thing. Dad just said, wait and see, wait and see. He talked quietly. This is the part of enemy pie that I can't do. In order for it to work, you need to go spend a day with your enemy. Even worse, you have to be nice to him. It's not easy, but that's the way this enemy pie thing works. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Of course I was. It sounded horrible. It was scary, but it was worth a try. All I had to do was spend one day with Jeremy Ross, and then he'd be out of my hair for the rest of the summer. I rode my bike to his house and knocked on his door. When Jeremy opened the door, he seemed surprised. He stood on the other side of the screen door and looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I was kind of nervous. "Can you play?" I asked. He looked confused. "I'll go ask my mom," he said. He came back in a little bit with his shoes in his hand. His mom walked around the corner to say hello. "You boys stay out of trouble, okay?" she said with a nice big smile. Do you think this is gonna work? We rode bikes for a while, and then we played on his trampoline. Then we made some water balloons and threw them at the neighborhood girls. But we missed. Jeremy's mom made us lunch, and after lunch, we went over to my house. It was strange, but I was kind of having fun with my enemy. He almost seemed nice, but of course I couldn't tell my dad that, since he'd worked so hard to make this enemy pie. Jeremy Ross liked my basketball hoop. He said he wished he had a basketball hoop like it, and that he wasn't even mean to me. I let him win a game just to be nice. Jeremy Ross knew how to throw a boomerang. He threw it so it even came back. I threw it and it went over my house and into the backyard. When we climbed over the fence to find it, the first thing Jeremy noticed was my treehouse. My treehouse was my treehouse. I was the boss. If my sister wanted in, I didn't let her in. If my dad wanted in, I didn't let him in. And if Jeremy wanted in, "Can we go in it?" he asked. I knew he was gonna ask me that. He was like on my list, the top person on my enemy list, and enemies aren't allowed in my treehouse. But he did teach me how to throw a boomerang, and he did have me over for lunch, and he did let me play on his trampoline. He wasn't very good at being an enemy. "Okay," I said, "but hold on." I climbed up ahead of him and tore the enemy list off the wall. I had a checkerboard and some cards in the treehouse, and we played games until my dad called us down for dinner. We pretended we didn't hear him, and when he got out to get us, we tried to hide from him, but somehow he found us. Dad made us macaroni and cheese for dinner, my very favorite. It was Jeremy's favorite too. Maybe Jeremy Ross wasn't so bad after all. I was laughing and beginning to think that maybe we should just forget about the enemy pie, because we were having so much fun. But sure enough, after dinner, Dad brought out the pie. I watched as he cut it into thick slices. "Dad," I said, it sure is nice having a new friend in the neighborhood." I was trying to get his attention and trying to tell him that Jeremy Ross was no longer my enemy. But Dad only smiled and said, "Oh, I think he thought I was just pretending." Do you think he's trying to get Dad, stop him from serving the pie to Jeremy Ross? Dad dished up 3 plates side by side with big pieces of pie and giant scoops of ice cream. He passed one to me and one to Jeremy. "Wow," said Jeremy, looking at the pie. "My dad never made pies like this." It was at this point that I panicked. I didn't want Jeremy to eat that enemy pie. He was my friend. I couldn't let him eat it. It's gonna be terrible. "Jeremy, don't eat it," I said. "It's a bad pie. I think it's poisonous or something." Jeremy's fork stopped before reaching his mouth. He crumpled his eyebrows and he looked at me funny. I felt relieved. I had saved his life. I was a hero. I stopped him from eating that pie. I can't wait to see what happens next. "If it's so bad," Jeremy said, "then why has your dad already eaten half of his?" I turned to look at my dad. Sure enough, he was eating his enemy pie. "Good stuff," he mumbled through a mouthful. And that was all he said. I sat there watching them eat enemy pie for a few seconds. Dad was laughing. Jeremy was happily eating it, and they were both enjoying it. And neither of them was losing any hair. Sounded safe enough. And I took a tiny taste. Enemy pie was delicious. Enemy pie was delicious? After dessert, Jeremy rode his bike home, but not before inviting me over to play on his trampoline in the morning. He said he'd teach me how to flip. As for enemy pie, I still don't know how to make it. I still wonder if enemies really do hate it, or if their hair falls out, or if their breath turns bad. But I don't know if I'll ever get that answer, because I just lost my best enemy. Just lost my best enemy. So Jeremy Ross is not his enemy anymore. How do you think that pie worked? Was it terrible tasting, disgusting? Did it make their hair fall out? No, it sounded like it was a pretty good pie. So maybe giving people a chance and spending time with your enemy and having fun with them can turn them into a friend. Think about that for a little bit. I hope you enjoyed this book, and I hope you enjoy some delicious pie over Thanksgiving. And you might have noticed that I'm in my jammies today because it is pajama day at school and at home. And I just want to wish from Daisy, from Mrs. Rose, and all of our teachers and all of our staff members here a very happy and healthy and safe Thanksgiving. We'll see you together just as soon as we can. And until then, I'm sending you a hug and I'm blowing you a kiss to you and your family. And I hope you enjoy some pie. Take care.